Welcome back for a special Sunday night episode where we venture back down to the Antarctic for the conclusion to Friday night. We hope you enjoyed part 1. This is FESTUNG 212, part 2, Hall of Erden. There was a door, old wood, metal plate and handle. Expensive, classic, well-crafted, something you'd see in an upper-class hotel, only abandoned and weathered by time and environment. I fought with myself to open it, and decided to. If there was a booby trap, so be it. I wanted to know. It was a large room that looked like a combination office and library. It was filled with Nazi paraphernalia and old German books and photographs. An oil canvas painting with Hitler hung from the wall. There was a wine rack, an old record player, and a collection of vinyls. Was this to be Hitler's last stand? Did he just never make it here? I thought about cracking one of the 100-year-old bottles of wine, but decided to avoid eating or drinking anything we didn't bring down with us. Maybe I'd sneak one back up, though. I walked towards his desk, curious at what I'd find, but my foot caught something on the floor and I tripped. I regained my balance and checked what it was. There was a latch handle and a metal square that looked a lot like a trap door. It occurred to me then we were right underneath the elevator. Oh my god, did the hole go deeper? I'd assumed we'd hit the bottom, but what if it kept going? And this trapdoor led to it. Curiosity took over, and I pulled at the latch, lifting the door. No explosions, no booby traps. There was a short metal staircase leading to a small viewing platform. I climbed down onto it, and saw at the far end there was a black iron spiral staircase leading down further. I peered over and saw the staircase didn't drop much further than about 10 feet. Below me was what looked like a large cement floor. It was smooth and encased the entire bottom of the tunnel, going right to the edges of the wall. This was the bottom, I suppose. I had reached it, and I was standing somewhere only one of the most evil men in history had stood. But on the cement floor, there was a large, rectangular chunk of granite in the center. It was perfectly out of place and reminded me of what you'd find on the lid of a sarcophagus, but far thicker. I descended the staircase, keeping focus on the heat and any possible tripwires or explosives, but there weren't any. This place was bare. I stepped down onto the cement floor. It wasn't actually cement, but something similar. It looked naturally formed, like some kind of heat-absorbing foam that had hardened over the ages. The granite lid was what looked most out of place. It was black, unlike the grayish-white foundation under it, and it looked to be over a ton. Why was it sitting perfectly symmetrically in the center of this odd basement? How'd they get it down here? Or was it always here? My mind kept pulling up the image of the lid of a tomb and some ancient being waiting under it to be brought back, which was silly, wasn't it? I approached it, my flashlight catching something on top of the lid. Carvings? There were words chiseled into the granite. I inspected them but couldn't make any out. They looked more like symbols from some dead language. Or languages. But at the very center of the block, carved over the other nonsensical gibberish, was a phrase I recognized as a modern language. It was hacked into the rock in German. Hall of Erden. I had no idea what that meant, but took a mental image of it. Is this where he kept his final weapon? Below his final stand? I put my hand on the rock to test for heat, but found the mass shifted under my pressure. The lid moved a few inches from my touch. I applied more pressure and found the rock was easier to move than a piece of paper. Curious, I decided to shift it further. The lid slid away from me, a loud crack coming from under it like rock breaking. What was revealed under the lid was something I could only describe as a world-changing event. There was a body in a coffin-shaped drop floor. Under the body, rock was cracking and crumbling away as if cued by the lid opening. The body was a man and was wearing a 1945 German Chancellor's uniform. He held a Luger in his right hand across his body and a copy of Mein Kampf in his left. He was old when he died. In his 80s it looked like, but well preserved. There was no question who it was. He still had his stupid mustache and haircut, though it had grayed during his elder years down here. My mind raced. Was it one of Hitler's doubles that supposedly committed suicide in Berlin? Or was this one of them? No, this was him. The second I saw his face, I knew it was him. This is no double. I needed to sit down, but the ground under Hitler's body cracked again, this time splintering and dropping away. Red light from below began to seep up through the rock. The drop floor under him collapsed, and Hitler fell with it. Red light and heat burst through the opening, filling the tunnel. I peered over the edge, down through the opening, and saw everything I never wanted. I saw fire and writhing masses of bodies clawing at each other. Waves of amber sprayed down on them. I saw erupting volcanoes spewing out more screaming bodies as they were scorched by flames. The fire moved like a living organism, lashing at the bare backs and chests. I saw faceless people burning in vast lakes of boiling water, while large winged creatures picked at them from the skies. Miles and miles of it. It was endless. I saw a being in the far, far distance. It stood amidst the erupting volcanoes, taller than any building, whose head disappeared in the dark red clouds above. A sound emerged from it, shaking the bodies and creatures down below. The glass on my protective mask cracked. As if on cue from the being, the bodies and creatures turned their attention up, towards me and the opening. They started rushing up, clawing, pulling, anything to get away from the fire and pain. Another wave of heat hit me. It was immediately unbearable, but I couldn't move. My whole body went full rigor mortis, my mask melting away. I stared down into the depths of hell, and it stared back up. I got my movement back, grabbed the granite lid, and tried to slide it over the opening, but it wouldn't budge. I got behind it with all my weight, but nothing. It was too heavy now. I looked back down and saw the winged creatures flying up towards the opening. The charred bodies of forgotten people were piling on top of each other, creating a mountain of flesh, crawling and gnawing and mashing over one another to reach me and the way out. I tried to push the lid again, but it was solid and unmoving. It was open now, and it wasn't closing. I rushed back up the staircase, red light and heat filling the chamber. I darted through the tunnel, climbed out of the wall panel, and out into the weapons hall. I had to get out. I had to get to the elevator. No time to get my shit. No time to warn anyone. There was no time for anything. I had to get up. And I had to collapse the tunnel from the top. But I had to get out first. As I turned out to the hallway, I saw ash and cinder filling the armory behind me. It was coming. I rushed out to the one elevator and saw Sullivan just coming out of the dormitories. He looked confused, like he'd just woken up. His eyes went wide when he saw the flames starting to fill the compound. I didn't have time to wait for him or anyone. I shut the gate and punched the elevator up at full blast. We lurched upward and pulled away. I watched Sullivan burst into flames as crowds of burning bodies poured into the hallway, piling onto him. The elevator moved fast. The fire was still down on the bottom level, but was slowly climbing the elevator shaft. I was going to be on this one until the next switch, which would take 10 minutes. I just hoped I would make it, and the metal framing for the elevator would hold out. We made it to the next switch. I moved fast, up through the platforms, and onto the second last elevator. This would bring me up to 4 kilometers from the surface, assuming I made it. As the elevator shot up the tunnel, I watched the platform I had just been on, collapsing into the engulfing flames. Screams echoed up from the ever-growing cloud of fire that filled the tunnel with the reek of sulfur, or as it was previously called, brimstone. I got to the final switch and rushed up to the second platform, but the elevator to go up was gone. They brought it up. Oh no, I was stuck here. I looked down and saw the fire rising up the elevator shaft. It couldn't be less than a few hundred yards away now. Then I remembered the second tunnel up. It'd be tight and 4 kilometers of cardio, but I'd at least survive. But that would take me hours to climb, and the fire would overwhelm the surface long before I got there. Unless I blew the tunnel. That was it. The explosives were on every level. I'd seen them on each switch. It hadn't just been through the mountain. The Germans had prepared for this exact situation. I rushed over to the edge of the tunnel. The heat waves rushing up caused my suit to simmer. My arms burned and I felt the plastic melting to my skin. I bit down and saw the controls for the tunnel explosives. Everything was written in German, but operated similar to the mechanics of a kitchen timer. I quickly set it for 1 minute and rushed across the platform to the far side of the tunnel. I opened the large metal door to the tunnel up and slammed it shut behind me. The footpath up was more like a spiral staircase, minus the stairs, and very tight and low, like a twirling crawl space. I was essentially crawling upwards on all fours in an upwards right lean. My arms burned from the plastic, but I tried not to pay any attention to them. I felt the explosion go off, and the walls pressing my shoulders inwards shook. I waited for everything to collapse and cave in on me. I waited for the heat to rise up behind, for the sulfur to fill my nostrils. I kept climbing, waiting for something to stop me, but it didn't. I had no idea how much further it was or how far I'd gone. What if somewhere up there, It had collapsed. The thought of crawling back was terrifying, but there wasn't anywhere to crawl back to. I'd have to dig through it all or just give up. No, the lower tunnel would have collapsed, and with any luck, the final stretch of the elevator shaft would have too, and I'd know soon enough if they did. I climbed, pulling myself up, non-stop for what felt like hours. Time disappeared. Then I smelt it. The sulfur. I turned back and caught the faint glow of red drifting up behind me. It was coming up the backup path. I scrambled faster, pulling myself up while a heap behind me got closer. The sulfur became overwhelming, and I saw ambers dancing and jumping behind me. Voices screamed up from the flames, echoing around me. Then there was light up ahead. It was fluorescent, the kind the military used. I was almost there. I climbed out into the main cavern, exhausted. My body was drained and empty of energy, but I sprinted through the foliage to the main tunnel out. I got to the first explosive, turned back, and saw the fire and bodies spilling out from the pathway. Sullivan was amongst them. He was barely recognizable, charred to a crisp. He saw me, and a horrific screech bellowed from him. I cranked the timer to 20 seconds and sprinted through the pathway. My only hope was the explosives were still linked together, and worked. As I burst out of the tunnel and into the freezing night, an earth-shattering series of explosions shook the ground beneath me, and I was thrown across the frozen landscape by the shock wave. I landed on the snow, hard, but got up and kept running. I couldn't feel my arms or legs, and had fallen into some kind of flow state of movement. I couldn't stop until I was back at the first camp and on my way to Novo Air Base. I wouldn't sleep until I was on a plane back stateside. I turned back and looked at the mountain I was just below. The mass of rock and granite splintered and had collapsed inward on itself. I hoped that would be enough. The first camp got me on a snowmobile and moved me to the airport. While waiting for my flight, I had my first moments of calm and began dissecting what had happened. The words carved into the lid, the ones I actually recognized as language, haunted me. Hull of Erden. I wrote the words out on a napkin, then looked up a translator on my phone. It was, indeed, German, and it translated to Hell on Earth. So that was it. That was his final weapon. Hitler was going to unleash eternal hell on the rest of us. Or was he? Had he, in his elder years, decided not to break the barrier? Had he found some kind of peace? Or did he leave himself there to be found someday, so that the discovery of his body could lead to this? I'm not sure I'll tell anyone, or I'll make something up, like the tunnel became unstable and caved in. But what if I didn't stop it? I collapsed a mountain on it. I prayed that would be enough to bury it all. That granite lid, whatever it was what separated Earth from hell. But it was gone now. I wonder how long it'll take to burn through the mountain and up into our world. And that concludes FESTUNG 212. We hope you enjoyed our trip into the snowy wastelands, and I imagine we'll probably be visiting them again soon, with some different characters facing some different peril. Have a great Sunday evening, and keep warm tonight.